This episode is brought to you by Nature's Bounty. Nature's Bounty believes your body is brilliant, naturally designed to thrive, inside and out. For those always looking for new ways to support your health from head to heels, Nature's Bounty has a range of over 400 vitamins and supplements born from 50 years of trust and care. Nature's Bounty. It's in your nature. Visit naturesbounty.com to learn more.
Wish you could become a morning person? You know the type, up before the sun, early morning runs, first one to the office with donuts and a smile. How do they do it? Easy. With the new Galaxy Watch 8, sleep tracking and personalized insights from Samsung Health help you improve so you can wake up to a whole new you. One who, dare I say it, skips the snooze? It's possible. Train your sleep with Galaxy Watch 8. Learn more at Samsung.com. Requires compatible Samsung Galaxy phone, Samsung Health app, and Samsung account.
This is Fortune's Wheel, podcast history of the late Middle Ages, and I'm Jonathan. Your time is your greatest currency. Make no mistake, and this fact of life does not go unnoticed by the creators on whom you spend your time. So thank you for spending your time listening and learning along with me on this podcast. On this episode, we will be continuing to merge our Patreon-only series called The Book of Alexios, which details all of those parts of Alexios Komnenos' story that didn't make it into the public podcast. We'll be merging that with our public podcast series detailing the Normans in Italy and Sicily. These two storylines will inevitably smash into one another, and as I said, that has already begun. To be clear, we are not finished with our Patreon series. We will continue it on Patreon, but there will be times when the two storylines crash into one another. There's a lot going on in this part of the world and this part of history. What happens in this particular episode will directly pertain to what we'll see from Robert Guiscard, which is why I chose to include this one on the public feed. I'm really excited about it, so I hope you enjoy it. If anybody wants to listen to the rest of these, please consider joining Patreon. The link is in the show notes. Now for a primer. Eastern Rome was struggling. Though we haven't explicitly said it lately, make no mistake that the same economic woes were still ravaging the empire. Civil unrest was still at a maximum, inside and outside of the capital. The Seljuk Turks were still pushing through Anatolia, and the ever-present threat of usurpers was still at the forefront of everyone's mind, most notably that of Emperor Nicephorus III, Botaniates, approaching 80 years old by this year, the year 1081. And with that, let's get started. This is Patreon episode 24, public episode 131, entitled The Book of Alexios, Chapter 5, Cheese Week. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show. Referring to her father's efforts to move against the emperor, Anna Komnene writes, quote, "It was during the night of Sunday in Cheese Week that my father made these arrangements. On the next day, just as the sun was rising, he left the city with his friends." End quote. Yes, you heard that right. Cheese Week. Now, many in the West aren't exactly familiar with Cheese Week, certainly not here in America, so let's take a quick look at this curiously named but incredibly important week in the spiritual calendar of Eastern Orthodoxy, whether they were living 1,000 years ago in Constantinople or around the world today. Cheese Week is the week before the official start of Lent. Of course, even non-Catholics and Eastern Orthodox Christians recognize the name Lent. It's a time we superficially associate with our friends and family members voluntarily giving up something they value. It could be sugar, tea, alcohol, smoking, caffeine, or even bread. But Lent is far more significant than just a 40-day period each spring of giving up something you enjoy. Originally, it was intended to mirror the spiritual cleansing associated with Jesus' 40 days spent in the desert, alone, and denying the powerfully persuasive temptations of Lucifer. Jesus emerged battered and exhausted and famished, but he was renewed, he was confident, and he had new purpose. If it's good enough for Jesus, then it couldn't be at all bad for us, right? It's that idea. So in Catholic communities, this 40-day period of abstinence and fasting and spiritual renew called Lent is kicked off 40 days before the day before Easter Sunday, called Holy Saturday. Now, minus the Sundays during this time, this day inevitably ends up on a Wednesday, a day we know as Ash Wednesday. However, the Eastern Orthodox Christians begin close to Ash Wednesday, but they begin on a Monday they call Clean Monday, because they count their Sundays and they start their 40-day count backwards on Good Friday, 2 days before Eastern Sunday. You see why the days are a little bit off between the two sects of Christianity. So the two proud traditions really split at this point, when it comes to Lent, that is. Where the Catholics have one day, the day before Ash Wednesday, called Shrove Tuesday, or more commonly, especially here in the States and in France, Mardi Gras, which translates to Fat Tuesday. Well, these Catholics use this day before the start of Lent to really let themselves go. Now, today we see utter debauchery in places like New Orleans, but it began with more practical reasons in mind. The Catholic population, which was pretty much everyone back then, was about to embark on a 40-day period of fairly intense fasting, certainly when it came to meat and dairy. Mardi Gras was one last day to consume as much of those perishable items as possible. It's like what my family does leading up to both Halloween and Easter each year. My wife looks at the shelves still full of all this candy, and she goes on her own personal crusade to cleanse the house of the worst of the candy, whether she throws it away or gives us a day to, eat some of it, because she knows that these bins are about to fill right back up again. Anybody else do that? Well, Eastern Orthodox Christians don't have a Mardi Gras to, get it all out before Lent starts. No, they have a week leading up to Lent to do things like that. And traditionally, this week has been called Cheese Week. And those in Constantinople, over 950 years ago, celebrated Cheese Week in similar but not exact ways as Orthodox Christians do today. And for our Slavic listeners out there, Cheese Week is referred to as Maslenitsa. It's called Cheese Week because in preparation for Lent, meat is prohibited, which really just leaves dairy products, eggs, fruit, veggies, and fish. The vast majority of dishes back then had cheese, milk, and butter as staple ingredients, so that's what they were left eating, essentially. And as Anna Komnena tells us, it was the Saturday and Sunday of Cheese Week that Alexios finalized his plans. As Cheese Week begins on Monday and ends on a Sunday, it was the last day, that Sunday, was the last day before Clean Monday, the start of Eastern Orthodoxy's Lenten period. That in and of itself is symbolic, as it was Clean Monday, the very next morning, that Alexios would embark on his journey to take the crown of Eastern Rome. And here's a little spoiler so as not to let this really interesting coincidence pass us by. Alexios Komnenos officially begins his march against the emperor on Clean Monday, and by the end of Lent, just a week before Easter Sunday, he became emperor. Now there's our ticking clock, by the way, the framework for this episode. What happened between Clean Monday 1081 and April 4th, 1081, which was the exact date that Alexios Komnenos became emperor. Well, what happened? If he failed to act when he did, any number of things were poised to happen. Alexios had to beat many players to the punch if his plans to become emperor were to succeed. The chessboard had been set. We learned this in the last episode, but allow me to set the stage for us right now. What did the Byzantine field look like, and why was it so pressing that Alexios act and succeed within a certain number of days or weeks? Well, first, Nicephorus III Botaniates was emperor in Constantinople. He was reading the writing on the wall and knew his end was near. But who would he pick? If given time, he already had an heir in Sidoninos. However, he knew Alexios well and trusted the young general. But there was another one out there declaring himself emperor too, another trustworthy, respected, and capable, fully capable man. Would he give the crown to this man instead? Second point, Alexios Komnenos had followed his mother's plans perfectly so far and created a strong alliance with the various Western armies under his control, who had converged upon the Thracian city of Tsourlos under the pretense of taking the port city of Kyzikos back from the Seljuk Turks. You remember all this? He had spoken to the leaders of these various contingents and gained their support in taking the crown instead of taking back Kyzikos. Alexios had then made his intentions clear, but he had yet to officially declare himself emperor yet. One important note is that Alexios and Isaac returned to the capital after meeting with his men in Tsourlos so as not to raise any suspicions. That's where we will find him today. Next, don't forget about the former slaves turned imperial advisors, Germanos and Borilos, who were plotting to steal Alexios and Isaac Komnenos and blind them behind the emperor's back. Their plans were already put into motion, so the Komnenoi had to rush their plans. Then, just before Alexios sent word to gain the support of his brother-in-law, Nikephoros Melissenos, who was the very capable general, powerful general of the Eastern Byzantine forces spoken about a minute ago, well, Alexios received a letter from Melissenos beating him to it. Melissenos had actually declared himself emperor and was appealing to Alexios to support his bid to claim the throne. Oh, and, there was also that splinter state of Philaretos Phrahimius becoming a thing to the southeast, but that could be dealt with at another time. But that was the chessboard. It was quite messy, actually, by March of 1081. And when Alexios decided to have his army march, having just received word from Melissenos, it was on Clean Monday. Anna even writes that the people were so excited for Alexios to take the crown that they even made up and sang a song as Alexios and his giant army marched out of Tsourlos. It went something like this, quote, "On Saturday in Cheese Week, their plan went foot. Alexios, hurrah, had used his nut. Alexios, he's your boy. On Monday at dawn, the hawk was off and out of sight." End quote. Yeah, so probably not as catchy in English as it was in Greek, but Anna was kind enough to offer a simple translation of meaning here. She writes, quote, "The meaning of this popular ditty was roughly this. On the Saturday of Cheese Week, Alexios, you did wonderfully well because of your wit. But on the Monday off you flew like some falcon soaring on high, away from the scheming barbarians." End quote. Yeah, still not sure how catchy it is in English. There was also one minor, though still somewhat consequential situation that needed to be attended to while Alexios made his way toward the capital. See, Anna Delicini, again, the brilliant mother of Alexios and Isaac Komnenos, the mastermind of the Komnenoi family, well, she had arranged a marriage with the emperor between Nikephoros III's grandson and her granddaughter, the daughter of her late eldest son, Manuel, who died of an earache years earlier. Her granddaughter was being tutored by one of Botaniati's men, as was custom in order to ingratiate the young couple-to-be in each family structure, as well as the intricacies of governance, courtly customs, and philosophies. Anna Delicini was terrified that this tutor would leak information to the emperor. Remember, though Alexios, his officers, and his soldiers were now acutely aware of his real intentions, they were still marching under the pretense, more or less publicly anyway, of liberating Kyzikos from the Turks. So at the time, because arrangements had to be rushed, given the constraints of the situation, and the Botaniati's boy and his tutor were sleeping in a room in Anna Delicini's palatial home the night all this was forced to go down, we hear that they silently closed the bedroom doors and then actually barred the doors shut in order to eliminate these two from leaking anything to Nikephoros III. In the meantime, Anna Delicini arranged her entire retinue to head to church at sunrise, so servants had hastily organized the horses and saddled them to be ready at a moment's notice. The pretense, again, was to head to church. This was entirely believable, due to Anna Delicini being quite religious. She was quite devout, But the real reasons were slightly different. The machinations of Anna Delicini and her two boys were definitely in motion. There was no going back at this point, so it was time to move. But Anna Delicini, again, the devout lady she was, insisted on praying to the Virgin Mother for divine protection, and that she needed all non-military women and children in their party to join her. The more the merrier, she thought. Alexios and Isaac tried to talk her out of it to see to their safe exit from the city, but Anna Delicini was as stubborn as she was politically acute. But see, it was more than prayers she was after. She knew that every single successful emperor required the backing of the church leaders, and the boys couldn't refute this. Again, it was imperative for Alexios and Isaac to see to the safety of the women in their lives. Anna Komnenos writes, quote, "Before first cockcrow, they opened the gates, and taking with them their mother, sister, wives, and children, went off to the Forum of Constantinople on foot. They took leave of them there, and ran in great haste to the palace of Blachernae, while the women hurried to the church of Hagia Sophia." End quote. However, their plan to keep the tutor and the emperor's kinsman locked away failed somehow. Torch in his hand, the tutor was able to escape the room and caught up to the retinue in the streets. Anna Delicini spotted the man approaching them, and without hesitation, she knew her only chance was to win the man over. She said to him, quote, "Some people have denounced us to the emperor, I'm sure. I will go to the holy churches and get what help I can from them, and when day breaks, I will come back to the palace. So go now, and when the porters open the gates, tell them of our coming." End quote. It seems their fears of the man squealing were unfounded, as he left straight away to talk to the porters. There was an annex to the Hagia Sophia called the Sanctuary of Bishop Nicholas. That's where Anna Delicini was heading with her group. See, the Sanctuary of Bishop Nicholas had been built long before, but it had served the purpose as a safe haven for the criminally charged. Anna Komnenos writes that she believes it was, quote, "purposely constructed by our ancestors for all accused persons, for if they entered its doors, they were freed from the penalties of the laws." End quote. But when they arrived, the verger, the man responsible for the sanctuary, initially refused to open the door, first inquiring who they were and what their purpose was for such an early morning visit. At this point, the sun had still not even quite begun to rise. It was very dark, which gave the whole situation a more cinematic feel, in my opinion. Someone in the party stepped forward and said, quote unquote, "Women from the East. They've spent all their money on necessary purchases and want to worship quickly before going home." Convinced of the lie, the verger unboarded the great doors to the sanctuary, and the women quickly ducked inside. This is where they would remain for the next few hours, but we're not done with them yet. As for Alexios and Isaac, they had left the women in the streets in the Forum of Constantinople. They ensured the women were delivered safely as close to the Hagia Sophia as possible without anyone seeing they were with the women, although they were still a little ways off down the street. From the moment they left their mother and the other women, the two brothers snuck through the dark, sleeping streets of Constantinople, and, surprisingly, they were heading straight for the belly of the beast. Well, one of the bellies of the beast anyway, as the Blachernae Palace was an imperial palace up in the far north of the city, near the outer walls. Piecing things together, because admittedly, Anna Komnenos jumps around here so much it was hard to follow at points, took a lot of rereading, but I think I have it right here. By the way, I don't blame her. There was so much happening in various places around the city all at the same time. There were things that just didn't make it into the episode, by the way. It was hard to narrate one thread while keeping up to date on the others. So there was a lot of kind of bouncing back and forth. Now, at some point immediately after they left the women in the Forum of Constantinople, the women then took the group down the road to the Hagia Sophia, where the sanctuary of Bishop Nicholas and all that was. At some point immediately after that, instead of heading north to the Blachernae Palace, away from the imperial palaces, the proper imperial palaces, they decided to go back, and they decided to go exactly into the great palace. Okay, so reaching this great palace, they snuck in and entered the gynaeceum. Remember, this was the name given to the women's quarters of the great palace. Now, inside, they secreted themselves into the room with the protovestiaria. The protovestiaria was actually an honorable position for the women of the court, as she was the person in charge of, the business end of the empress's life. The protovestiaria was in charge of everything from the empress's wardrobe to a young empress's education and ceremonial duties and whatnot, from the supervision of servants to organizing the entire gynaeceum. The protovestiaria was a very respected position, had a lot of responsibilities. In fact, there was a male counterpart called the protovestiarius who did the same thing except for the emperor as well. Now, why would Alexios and Isaac risk everything to go into the great palace to notify the protovestiaria? Well, as we now know, this lady had the in on everything happening, so she could notify Empress Maria when the time was right. There are other connections to consider, though. I'm telling you, the story goes so deep here. See, Empress Maria's protovestiaria was none other than Caesar John Ducas's daughter-in-law. But she was also the wife of a man we'll see soon enough, a high-ranking naval officer named Georgios Palaiologos. Now, she was also the mother of a man the two Komnenoi brothers spoke to that morning as well. We'll get to him soon. His name was Georgios Palaiologos, that is, Jr. So, Georgios Palaiologos Sr., the dad, was the husband of this protovestiaria. Now, Senior was a huge loyalist of Nicephorus III's, but his son, Junior, though very loyal to the emperor still, had fought and served with Alexios Komnenos, and he leaned more Alexios's direction, making this a risky gamble on their part, because the gamble here was that the Komnenoi were attempting to gain the trust of not only the protovestiaria, but also her husband and son. Now, what makes Georgios Palaiologos Jr.'s, I'm calling him Junior, connection to Alexios and Isaac even stronger is that Georgios Palaiologos Jr. was actually married to the Komnenoi brothers' sister. Whew. Might want to re-listen to the last minute. At first, Anna Komnene tells us that, and I'm just going to say Junior and Senior from now on. Now, it's worth mentioning that Georgios Palaiologos Jr. was there in the quarters, in the protovestaria's quarters that morning. For whatever reason, I'm just, it's not clear to me, but he was there for an exchange between Alexios and Isaac, the protovestaria, and, him. Right? So at first, Anna Komnene tells us that Junior was vehemently against overthrowing the emperor. Like he thought of every reason not to in this conversation. But his mother insisted that he support the Komnenoi. Remember, her main loyalties lay with her empress, and her empress was the adopted mother of Alexios Komnenos. Right, so from here, at this point, the sun was beginning to lighten the eastern sky, and the two brothers knew their time to escape was running out. Anna Komnene tells us that they broke the locks on the gate to the imperial stables there in the great palace. They were after some fresh steeds, 2 fresh steeds, with which to storm out of the capital and meet up with their army, who, despite their previous orders to march at daybreak, in the wake of recent events, were told to stand by until Alexios returned. In these stables, as the brothers were quietly but quickly saddling up a couple of horses, we see where history can get a bit unpleasant. But Alexios felt it absolutely necessary for their safety. Anna Komnene writes the following, quote, "Some of the horses were left there, after slitting their hind legs with their swords. All those which seemed more useful, they took." End quote. Yeah, so it's no different than in the movies when the hero is being chased. He slits the tires of his enemy's cars or, rushes out of the bar and kicks over the long line of Harley Davidsons. Only, these were beautiful, innocent creatures. They were incapacitating. Now, as Alexios and Isaac Komnenos were pushing their horses, and a few extra they found useful, as the passage stated, faster and faster out of the city toward their first stop of the monastery named Cosmidion. The sun was rising, and within an hour, the emperor would rise to the news of what had occurred with his megas domesticus, Alexios, and the arrival of the party of women and children entering into the part of the Hagia Sophia that has typically been used to house criminals on the run. The writing on the wall was beginning to come into focus even more for the old Nicephorus III. He summoned a meeting immediately where, Anna tells us, he quote-unquote launched a stinging attack on the domesticus. Now, at the close of this meeting, he deputized two men, Straboromanos and Euphemianus, to head to the Hagia Sophia and bring back Anna Delicini, Irene Ducaina, and Irene of Alania back to him. Now, these two men arrived at the Hagia Sophia minutes later, but Anna Delicini stood up to them. Anna Komneni provides the supposed speech her grandmother gave these two agents of the emperor. Quote, "Tell the emperor this, my sons are faithful servants of your majesty, and gladly bearing allegiance to you in all things, they have not spared soul or body, being always the first to expose themselves to danger and fighting bravely for your empire. But jealousy, which cannot bear your majesty's goodwill and kindness to them, has brought them into great and hourly peril. And when their enemies planned to gouge out their eyes, my sons who had discovered this plot found the danger intolerable, as well as unfair, and left the city, not as rebels, but as faithful servants, with three objects in view: to escape imminent peril, to convince your majesty of the conspiracy against them, and to implore your majesty's protection." End quote. So Anna Delicini was, well, she was just as right as she was wrong, right? Yes, they were fleeing because the secret threat from Germanos and Berylos were the most imminent, the immediate danger they were in, and this required them to steer clear of Constantinople for a time. However, the whole faithful servant thing, it was just garbage. In reality, Germanos and Berylos' plot to blind Alexios and Alice were simply the things that forced them to carry out their coup before they were ready to. But as for what Anna Delicini was intending to do, which was to buy her sons time to escape and shift the blame for all of this disruption of the emperor's peace onto a secret plan hatched by two of the emperor's trusted advisors, Anna Delicini was a masterclass. But things get way cooler, especially if you're doing what I'm doing here and playing this all out like some epic movie in my head. Straboromanos and Euphemianus tell her that, sure, they get where she's coming from. They have a job to do. Now, they don't want this to get out of hand, so please, let's do the right thing and answer the summons from your emperor. I implore you, Well, Anna Delicini plays another card here. She says, quote, "Listen, it's crazy not to come to the Hagia Sophia and not pray. Just let me go in, pay my respects, and give thanks to God and the Virgin Mother to, intercede for me with God and the Emperor's soul." End quote. Like, hey, come on, I'm here. Are you really going to deny an old lady the chance to pray for the safety of her sons, who have unfairly plotted against, as well as the well-being of the emperor she loved dearly? Well, the men must have turned to each other, sighed, and said, sure, why not? Just be quick about it, yeah? Now, Anna Komneni writes the next part like this, quote, "It was a reasonable request, and they granted it. She was allowed to enter. As if she were weighed down with old age and worn out by grief, she walked slowly, though in reality she was pretending to be weary, and when she approached the actual entrance to the sanctuary, made 2 genuflections. On the third, she sank to the floor, and taking firm hold of the sacred doors, cried in a loud voice, 'Unless my hands are cut off, I will not leave this holy place, except on one condition, that I receive the emperor's cross as guarantee of safety.'" End quote. Pretty awesome.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Cerama Origins by the Weekend Coffee Collection. Introducing Samra Origins. My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samra. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold, soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samra Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
No one should have to choose between their own safety and their pets. But nearly half of domestic abuse survivors delay leaving because they can't bring their pets with them. Purina is helping to create more pet-friendly domestic violence shelters through the Purple Leash Project, so survivors and their pets can escape and heal together. Visit Purina.com/purple to learn more.
The all-new 2026 Hyundai Palisade Hybrid doesn't just turn heads. It commands respect. With its stunning exterior, luxurious interior with available captain seats, and spacious third-row seating and equipped with advanced technology, you and the family are making a statement before you even step out. Okay, Hyundai. Visit HyundaiUSA.com to learn more and experience the all-new 2026 Palisade Hybrid today.
At this, Straboromanos and Euphemianus probably looked at each other once more and, exasperated, been like, we really don't need this crap. But Straboromanos took off his own cross and handed it to her. But Anna Delicini ridiculed the size of his cross, saying it wasn't from the emperor, therefore it wasn't worth a thing to her. The cross, she insisted, needed to be large enough for all to see and directly from the emperor as his personal guarantee of safety. At this moment, as the two men were rolling their eyes, just wanting this lady to come with them so they could go to breakfast, pleased, having made done the bidding of the emperor, all that. Well, at this moment, a mysterious figure appeared in the church doors behind them. She pulled her veil back and revealed herself to be Irene of Alanya, first cousin of Empress Maria, and wife of Isaac Komnenos, making her the daughter-in-law of Anna Delicini. Irene of Alanya firmly declares to the two men, quote, let her go if she wishes, but we are not leaving this church without a guarantee, even if we have to die, end quote. Now with the backing of the Empress, essentially, the two men knew they'd been outmaneuvered, that these women would have to be violently dragged out, which would have been political suicide for the Emperor and a literal death sentence for these two men. They left the Hagia Sophia and returned to tell Nicephorus III what had transpired. Anna Komneni writes, quote, Nicephorus was a good man, and touched by the women's words, sent her the required cross, and with it his guarantee, end quote. The protections came, but not in the way that we, or at least I, was expecting. I thought they'd be free to roam the city, or at least the palace, but that wasn't the case. Anna Delicini, Isaac's wife Irene of Alanya, the whole group, right, including Alexios' wife Irene Ducaina, the whole group were sent to a nearby convent named Petrion. In fact, because the emperor was pretty clearly being rebelled against, somewhere by some people, at least in its early stages, he played it safe. Nicephorus III ordered his wife's most trusted advisor, and the wife of not only one of his most loyal Navy officers, but also a quite capable Army officer as well, the wife, the Protovestiaria, remember? Well, he ordered her to meet Anna Delicini at Petrion. But why would Nicephorus III order Empress Maria's top servant to be whisked away into a nunnery? Well, her proximity to all things top-tier political made her very influential, and he didn't want to risk anything leaking out of the palace during this time. One of Nicephorus III's courtesies to the ladies he just ordered into a nunnery was that they could bring with them anything and everything they needed while they were kept there. What this did was allow the Protovestiaria to work her magic. This Dukas lady had a nearly never-ending supply of whatever she needed, so she buttered up every guard put outside the gates of the nunnery. She allowed them to take all the food they wanted from the stores in the nunnery, but in exchange they were to give them all of the information they knew each day. Anna Komneni writes, quote, "After that, the guards became more eager to supply information, and as a result, not a single detail of what was going on escaped the women." End quote. Now, once the two Komnenoi brothers made it to Tsourlos, where the army was ready to march at a moment's notice, they decided now was the right time to shoot off a quick message to Caesar John Ducas directly, who is currently not in the capital. He was at his own estate nearby, but it was just outside the city in a town called Moribundus. And there is this funny little scene where his young grandson, also named John, was already up. He was already woken up and wreaking havoc around the house while Grandpa slept in, right? Remember, it was still quite early by this time of the day, the sun having only just risen an hour or two earlier. Well, the message was delivered, and this young, precocious little stinker takes the message and goes into his grandpa's bedroom to give it to him. The scene actually went like this. This little kid comes bounding into John Ducas's bedroom and yells something like, "A rebellion's happening, Gramps! A rebellion's happening!" The old man, just opening his eyes, slaps the boy on the back of the head. Anna Komneni writes, quote unquote, "John boxed his ears," which is pretty funny, and then pushes the kid away, telling him to quit making stuff up. Probably smarting from the hit, young John leaves, but he comes back a few minutes later to try again. This time, though, he brought the actual letter that Alexios had written and gave it to his grandpa. You can imagine the boy with some smug satisfaction as he watched his grandfather wipe the sleep out of his eyes and read the letter with growing panic. The letter was written in code and metaphor, just in case it was intercepted, but Anna tells us that there was, quote, "a very cleverly veiled reference to the revolt," end quote. The letter read, quote, "We have prepared a very fine dish, not without rich, savory sauce. If you would like to share the feast, come as soon as you can to sit with us at the perfect banquet," end quote. Cleverly disguised, right? John Ducas, the older one, that is, immediately stood up, dressed, and ordered the messenger to be brought into the house. At first, after hearing the verbal recounting from the messenger, John Ducas rubbed his face in despair. But Anna tells us that after a minute to think about it all, he decided that this was the moment to get someone else on the throne. If not a Ducas, then maybe the husband of one, right? Remember, Alexios was married to John's granddaughter, Irene Ducaina. John immediately saddled up and rode to meet the Komnenoi brothers. Now, along the way, John Ducas comes across a man named Byzantius. Byzantius was carrying a large load with him on several, horses or donkeys' backs, right? And John soon learned who this man was and what he was carrying. See, Byzantius was in charge of carrying large sums of gold, collected through the emperor's taxation, mind you, and bringing it back to the treasury in Constantinople. John Ducas convinced the guy to stay with him at a nearby inn just for the night, just for some company, right? They were getting along fantastically. The man was entirely against this. I mean, trust no one, not even the Caesar, when you're solely responsible for the emperor's money, right? But the man eventually agreed. Well, this Byzantius was correct that something was afoot. The night before, John Ducas promised Byzantius that he could go wherever he wished the next morning. But the next morning, as Byzantius was saddling his horses and loading them up again, John Ducas implored the man to ride with him just for a short time. Hey, everything was great. They were getting along great. And right when his anger, Byzantius's anger, took hold of him again and he refused the request, John reveals himself and his intentions. Anna writes, quote, "John advanced on him and held him back. As Byzantius would not listen, he changed his tactics and spoke in a harsher tone with threats of what would happen if he did not obey," end quote. At this, Byzantius still refused, insisting that he needed to head straight to the capital and finish the job he was being paid to do. But John just turned around and stole the gold. Like, all of the gold. Then, as promised the previous night, he reminded Byzantius that he was free to go anywhere at this point. It was a promise he made. The problem for Byzantius was twofold. First, he couldn't go to the capital empty-handed because no matter the reason, he would be thrown in a dungeon for it. And second, Byzantius couldn't go back the way he came because people were already beyond pissed that they had to pay the taxes in the first place. So there was no home there either. He chose to remain in John Ducas's company. From here, John Ducas, accompanied by Byzantius now, led his train of horses and mules carrying loads of gold. Well, they came across a band of Turkish men. No doubt there must have been a throat-stopping few moments when John and Byzantius must have thought that they were surely going to be killed and robbed. But John Ducas, being the masterful orator he was able to convince these Turkish mercenaries to join them. Yeah, promising that whatever they saw on the backs of these beasts was a mere drop in the bucket to what the new emperor could and would give them if they joined his cause. Miraculously, they agreed and rode with John on his way to meet Alexios. Later that afternoon, John Ducas was seen at the head of a small band of Turks and a train of horses and mules loaded down with heavy sacks. Scouts rode out to meet him and then rode quickly back to camp to tell Alexios and Isaac. Alexios jumped on his horse immediately and bolted out to meet the Caesar. They both jumped off their horses, and Alexios, Anna says, threw his arms in uncontained joy around his uncle-in-law. It was actually probably a pretty awesome scene to witness. Imagine writing a letter to an influential old man only to see him show up, thinking he was going to show up alone or, but see him show up with bags and bags of gold and a small band of mercenaries to help out. John Ducas in this moment is a bloody legend. Everything was now in place. The women were safe, the army was assembled and ready to march. They had secured the support from people like Caesar John Ducas and the Protovestiaria, not to mention Empress Maria herself. Georgios Palaiologos Jr. also joined the rebellion, along with the two mighty leaders, Humbertopoulos and Pakorianos from the last episode. It was time to march, and every town they came to along the way, they were greeted with a fair amount of fanfare. People were always nervous when an army marched on the capital, but this was Alexios Komnenos. He had protected the realm time and time again, but along the way there was one issue that needed to be resolved to have complete unity. It seems that all who were marching with Alexios were on board. However, there was still a split in loyalties, and in reality, many of the army were following not Alexios, but his older brother Isaac. Why? Well, Isaac, to be sure, was another respected warrior and leader. Sadly, Isaac Komnenos was captured twice already by the Turks and was ransomed each time, which never looks good. But he saved a lot of face when he was sent to the powerful walled city of Antioch to gain control of its situation with both the encroaching Seljuk Turks as well as a massive amount of internal strife and corruption. Isaac did well in his few years there, but he was called back to his little brother's side in 1078 when Nicephorus III usurped the crown. People admired and loved Isaac Komnenos, but his little brother Alexios simply gained far, far more critical acclaim through his military exploits. Remember, the Komnenoi family didn't just appear out of nowhere. Alexios' grandfather, Manuel, was a trusted general in the service of the great Basil III, the Bulgar slayer. And his two sons, Isaac and John, that is, Manuel's two sons, Isaac and John, were major leaders, both militarily and politically later. This Isaac became Emperor Isaac I Komnenos back in the late 1050s, remember. Alexios and Isaac were the sons of John Komnenos, and they had an older brother, also named Manuel, who was one of the most promising military minds in the empire at the time, but sadly he died of that ear infection just before Manzikert. From there, well, we know about Alexios' history by now, especially those who have been listening to the Patreon series called The Book of Alexios. Anna Komnene writes about this split in the army. To be clear, all were on board with what was happening, but some felt that Alexios had earned the crown himself, but that Isaac, being the elder brother, deserved it, right? She writes, quote, "The majority prayed that the throne would fall to Alexios, but Isaac's supporters had not given up hope. They did their best to win the support of everyone for their man. To all appearances, the division was irreconcilable. Some keen for Isaac to become ruler of the empire, some for Alexios. All those present working hard to canvass votes for their own choice, pulling all the strings, as they say, and cleverly making use of every device to have Alexios proclaimed emperor. Thus they converted everyone to their way of thinking, and Isaac's support gradually ebbed away." End quote. Alexios's accession wasn't a given. Even considering that he still had yet to depose the emperor, there were still a number of small obstacles to overcome. Admittedly, I, like countless others to write about this in the past, have been narrating this as if Alexios was the only actual candidate. But I want to make clear that that is only able to be done with the hindsight of over 900 years. At the time, it wasn't so cut and dry, but we learned that John Ducas, ever the power broker, was rallying those around Alexios. There was no ill will toward Isaac, again, to be clear, but they were marching for the crown, and they needed to provide a united front for the strongest candidate. In John Ducas's estimation, Alexios was the strongest. Anna says that, quote unquote, "Caesar John simply proved irresistible." Some of the arguments were quite compelling for Alexios. Anna writes, quote, "What did the Ducai not do? What did they not say? What benefits did they not promise to the officers and to the rank and file of the army if Alexios was raised to the imperial throne? He will reward you," they declared, "with most magnificent gifts and honors, each according to his deserts, not haphazardly like ignorant generals of no experience. Alexios has been your army commander for a long time and the megas domesticos of the West. He has shared salt with you, fought bravely at your side in ambush and set battle, sparing neither body nor limb nor even life itself for your safety's sake, again and again, crossing with you over the mountain and plain, knowing the miseries of war and understanding you well, both as individuals and as a unit. He is dear to Ares, and more than anything, appreciates brave warriors." End quote. So I found a lot to dissect there, some of it quite subtle and easy to overlook. Whole episodes could be spent on the line, "He shared salt with you," due to the necessity and value of salt throughout history, something that we today take wholly for granted. Marble, granite, obsidian, in my humble estimation, as important as these rocks were to human history, none of it holds a candle to salt. Another part is the one about Alexios being dear to Ares, as that one single line was a powerful one to the Byzantines. As I said before in the podcast, we simply cannot forget that though these were devout Eastern Orthodox Christians who spurned all things non-Christian, dismissively labeling all of it as pagan, the stories and myths of old still played a major role in their lives. They may not have believed in those gods and goddesses, but they certainly utilized the wisdom gained from it all. To liken Alexios to Ares was a massive hit to their psyche, equating Alexios to the epitome of a warrior and brother to the warrior. When you're currying the favor of warriors, it's good to invoke things like invoke the things they would most appreciate, right? So that was the public game being played on their march toward Constantinople, but internally, something peculiar was also happening. A little brother was still giving homage to his older brother. See, Anna tells us, quote, "Meanwhile, Alexios himself treated Isaac with every respect, allowing him precedence at all times, through brotherly love." End quote. But Isaac knew that his little brother, though showing respect for his elders, which was admirable, was merely wasting time. Sure, Isaac had his supporters, but he knew that it was a failing idea, failing more and more with every step toward the capital. Isaac knew that they were all wasting precious time. Isaac knew he would never be emperor. But he also knew that Alexios would most likely be the better one. So there came a time that he would need to step up and publicly put a lid on any aspirations of him becoming emperor. Anna writes, quote, "Isaac stood up and taking the purple-dyed sandal tried to put it on his brother's foot. Alexios objected again and again. "Come," said Isaac, "it is through you that God wishes to recall our family to power." End quote. She later says that Isaac, quote unquote, forcibly put on the purple sandal and, quote unquote, the Dukai led the acclamations. She goes on to describe the moment, quote, "It was indeed an extraordinary sight. Here were men who before had divided loyalties, prepared to face death rather than disappointment of their hopes. Now in one swift moment they were so united in purpose that all traces of faction were obliterated. One would have thought there had never been a difference of opinion." End quote. And thus Alexios Komnenos, with the insistence of his elder brother Isaac, became the one true claimant of the throne within that army. But, as mentioned before, there was another claimant to the throne besides the emperor himself, and this was, by all accounts, merely coincidental. It just happened to be at the same time, which is just funny. Neither Alexios nor his brother-in-law Nicephorus Melissenus were aware of what the other was doing during this time, and the declarations of their intentions to become emperor were made simultaneously yet separately. Remember the letter sent by Melissenus to Alexios and Isaac, asking for their support in his bid to the throne, received just as Alexios was about to order a letter written to Melissenus asking for the same thing. In light of this letter from Melissenus a few days earlier, and the now unanimous decision to elevate Alexios to the crown, Alexios directed a new letter to be written to Melissenus. But this is where we will begin our next episode. This entire sequence of events took place in the span of just a few days. If you could believe it, a lot happened on this episode. Usually histories like those 1,000 years ago give us sweeping 30,000-foot views of the details, but, biased though it may be, Anna Komnenos' account corroborates other contemporary and near-contemporary accounts of the same events, and it's a treasure trove of valuable, and let's be honest, highly entertaining information. And what took place here occurred during Cheese Week. The next episode will be the bookend of this incredible tale, the tale of Alexios Komnenos' rise to power. In my estimation, we have but one more shared public Patreon episode until the two storylines fully merge. And I can't wait to tell you about it.